I certainly believe that Shinty should enjoy protected status in the same way as Gaelic to secure the future of the sport in Scotland.
That was the past president of Kinussie Shinty Club, Russell Jones, alongside the CEO of Camanachd Association, Rory Davidson. Lovat captain Martin Mainland joined our reporter and occasional Shinty spectator, Scott MacLennan, to discuss the future of this amazing sport. First, we turn to the highlight of the Shinty calendar, the Camanachd Cup on September 20th.
So we're just over a week away from the Camanachd Cup Final, which is certainly a highlight of the Shinty calendar. It's certainly one of the sport's biggest days, if not the biggest day. What do you think makes this event, particularly the final, special? Rudy, tell us your views.
Yeah, well, it'll be my first full Camanachd Cup Final in my role, so I'm actually really excited about that, as I'm sure the wider community is, and in particular Kinussie Newtonmore. It's a fantastic focal point for them, but it is obviously Shinty's premier domestic trophy, and with that brings a lot of intrigue, interest and spotlight. So it's a really great day for the sport to celebrate the very best of Shinty, and away from the Cup, two teams that are performing very well in the Premier League, so we hope it will be a fantastic game of Shinty.
Indeed, a great day out. Russell, you've obviously got a bit of an interest in this final.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, obviously everyone looks forward to to the Camanachd Cup. That's the big event of the season. Shinty's maybe slightly different in that way. I mean, in most other sports, the league is the true test of, who's the best team of the season. And, if you play 18 league games and you come out on top, the Camanachd Cup, the top teams are playing 4 games. But that's the one you want to win. That's, as a club, as a player, as a youngster, aspiring to play Shinty, that's the games you want to play in. And I think it's the same with every club, as, Martin I would imagine would agree with. And yeah, Camanachd Cup Final, that's the day, even as a supporter, as a player, as a coach, that's the one you want to be at. So everyone's looking forward to it, yes.
Of course, Martin, a lot of people will be there from Kinussie Newtonmore, but there'll be others supporting other teams, which is not something you would normally find in other sports. It's a way to bring Shinty together, would you agree?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's one of these things where all the local communities within the entire Shinty community would come out to view. It's the Blue Ribbon event, so it's one of these things that everybody wants to attend if they get the chance to. So,
obviously, the focus for the Camanachd Cup will be on the final, the main event of the day, but it's not the only event of the day. Tell us what else is there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the important thing for us as an association is to honour the competition and recognise the two teams that will be competing. But we want to encourage as many people as possible to come to that, the wider community. It's an event that, I'm a non-Shinty player, but I was always aware of it because of the profile and exposure it had on BBC and BBC Alba. And we want to get the sport into as many new audiences as we can. One of the good things that's happening next weekend is the MacMaster Cup. So Lovat and Skye will be playing that in under 14s level. A brilliant opportunity for those young players to come and experience a final on the Bught in front of the big crowd and get then the opportunity to get a little taste for what it could be like when they become seniors.
But with this development as well, obviously we've had the introduction of the new Bught Park Pavilion, which will also have an immersive Shinty museum as well. Do you think this investment will sort of mark a turning point in Shinty? Do you think it's going to make a massive role in getting, the Shinty word out there even more than what it is now?
The redevelopment is really significant for the sport. It kind of signals out the sport's ambition to be more modern and to develop and to grow. And one of the ways that we can help the sport do that is through facility development. So having a focal point in Inverness, widely regarded as the home of Shinty, is significant for us. I think just as well in terms of people engaging in the sport, meeting their expectations when they come along to significant games and finals of what they would expect to see and feel when they're there in terms of seating, toilets, changing rooms, etc. That modernised environment is really, really important for us. But we recognise it's one location in Inverness, and we have a duty to kind of meet the needs of our membership and our community across Scotland. So it does give us a focal point for that. And from an association point of view, that the opening of Shinty's story will be significant for us. And actually, that's the way that we think we can reach a wider audience, a wider part of our community. A lot of the activities we have planned will be about outreach and taking the experience to people in different parts of the country. So although the driver has been in Inverness, there's an opportunity for us to engage a wider membership and community, and that's what we plan to do.
Russell, as someone who's not from Inverness, who's representing, in fact, a ward in the Highland Council a bit further to the south, and certainly another home, or you could say the capital of Shinty in Strathspey and Badenoch, do you see the same value in having those sorts of facilities built up, even if they are in Inverness?
Yes, I think it's very important that all Shinty clubs try to modernise as much as is possible. Kinussie in the last 10, 15 years, I've done a lot of work at the Dell, Newtonmore, done work at the Ale, and Lovat have got a fantastic facility at their pitch now at Kiltarlity. And I think it is the way forward. If we want to be a really relevant modern sport, we have to recognise we have to move at the 21st century, and if we want to attract kids to come and play, you have to have facilities, because other sports have got facilities. We've got to have that. As far as the back park goes, I'm interested. You said it's an HQ for Shinty, a hub. I think that's great, but I would like to see a bit more identity, and I would like to see that pushed a bit more by Highland Council, by High Life Highland, and say this is actually a Shinty facility. I don't see an awful lot of that at the moment. I'm led to believe that there's going to be more, but I would like to see signage, and I would like to see it acknowledged that the back park is a Shinty facility.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that I think the Camanachd Association have done really well to get this in place just now. I would want to ask, though, if there was any potential further requests or discussions being had with clubs in the Camanachd in regards to improving other facilities that probably need updated. Given the clubhouses, some are probably not up to standard in comparison to other sport at the same sort of level, so I don't know if there's anything in the framework for future development at other parks that are being discussed.
Yeah, I think we recognise that we've talked about how Shinty is a community sport, and at the very happy of those communities invariably is the Shinty Club, and as a consequence the clubhouse. So that's a place where people come and congregate and share stories and celebrate and commiserate. As Russell said, a number of clubs have made significant strides independently, which is fantastic. And I think it's much more than just a clubhouse. It might be maintenance costs, it might be the pitches, redeveloping the pitches, it might be secondary pitches that you've got at market stands, the clubhouse at Lovat, which is a fantastic development. So invariably these conversations come down to investment and money, and that's difficult for us in this association. But what I think we can absolutely do is work with clubs and our whole membership to understand where there's a need, and we can be advocates, we can support, we can signpost, we can bring other people around the table who might have sponsorship investment opportunities, that we can hopefully leverage that on behalf of our clubs to try and access those opportunities. And I think also what we can do is we'll be running a series of club engagement sessions around the country, and we're getting a lot of thematic feedback on facilities. I think there's an opportunity for us to better tell the story of how clubs have done it successfully previously and share that with other clubs and let them know that it can be challenging, but there are ways in which you can do that. So we recognise it's an important aspect at the moment we'd be keen to support clubs with.
Speaking as a captain, I mean, how important is that to have improved, if not excellent, facilities for a squad?
If I could touch on it, going back to us talking about the McMaster final, I think us having the updated facilities actually goes a long way into getting the youth involved. We went through a long period without having much success within our youth systems, and over the last couple of years, once we had our pitch developed and we'd done the training pitch, etc., and then upgraded our facilities like our clubhouse, you did see a surge in the performances from the young ones. It gives them a platform to push on, and probably deters them from going and finding either other sports or other activities to get involved in. So yeah, it makes a big difference.
I presume it also shows the level of serious intent behind a club or any form of organisation when you've got proper facilities. I'm thinking now of the football changing facilities in my own hometown when I was growing up, and you kind of need a shower after you came out of the shower sort of place. So
in terms of what we and I want the sport to be, and we want it to be as welcoming and as accessible as possible. So people already in the pathway, the new people coming in, need to have a really positive experience and need to help work with clubs to create the right environment. And I think a modernised contemporary facility helps drive that. But it's beyond the facility, as I said. It's about the surface that they're playing on, the equipment that they have. We need that to be really modern and accessible and engaging for people, so that they maintain their engagement in the sport.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that was something that you were bringing up earlier, wasn't it, Martin? The need to sort of search for talent and bring talent, young talent, into the game. I'd like to hear from everyone on that.
Young talent is something that a sport like Shinty really does end up having its challenges with, because you are effectively, you're in competition with other sports, a lot of local sports and even wider afield. You could go up to any young athlete who could be multifaceted in different sports and could turn their hand to almost anything. And you basically try to make the sport of Shinty as attractive as possible to negate them disappearing and going off into another sport. So yeah, all these talks of facility changes and stuff, they make a big difference for attracting young talent. But at the same time, it's not just about that. It's about advertising the community aspect and stuff as well. And if the community pulls in together, like with what we've had at Lovat, that's how we've managed to fund the facilities getting upgraded. So it's about as much as getting the communities involved as it is just finding the money. And it's not all on the likes of the Camanachd Association to try and push things through. It does land on the clubs specifically to do that. And it's their responsibility as much as anyone else's, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Shinty, possibly more so than any other sport, almost all of our clubs were only as good as good as the players are coming out of our primary schools. You know, the primary schools are where our raw materials are. And obviously the sport is totally amateur, so you can't just go and cherry pick, players from other places. So it's in the primary schools. You really have to inspire and invigorate the next generation of players. And as Martin has said, facilities are hugely important for that. And going forward, I mean, certainly we would hope that as many clubs as possible can come on board with that and, upgrade facilities and pitches. And I think there is money there. I mean, I don't know the exact story of how Levitt raised the money, but have been quite close to what happened in Camanachd in the last 15 years, and it's been a long journey, but the money's available there if you've got the right people and the right energy and drive, and don't settle for people saying, well, 20 years ago we didn't have that and we didn't need that, and it's always been fine like that. Don't accept that. Say, no, this is the way forward and this is what we want to do. And I mean, even something maybe as random like when we were redeveloping the Dell and we want to get a scoreboard. And people say, no, we're spending £7,000 on a scoreboard. I mean, we don't need a scoreboard. Why have we got a scoreboard? And then you explain, well, with the funding they put in place, it's actually going to cost about £1,500 because we can fund it. And then the scoreboards, and now everyone says, that scoreboard's great, that's fantastic, I love that scoreboard. So I mean, you've got to push forward and say, and I think all the kids that come and play, they love having the scoreboard up. And if you're losing a game, it's not great having the scoreboard up.
You mentioned a couple of things there. I think it deserves to be teased out a little bit. One was schools. Do you think that Shinty should be played more in schools? Do you know how many schools it's played in? I don't. I'm asking an honest question.
No, I mean, 100%. I mean, and I think I actually had a conversation about this during the week, that, in Highland, the Gaelic language, has, kind of protected status, if you like, and special status, which I'm not a Gaelic speaker, but I totally agree with that, and I think that's great. But I actually think that, Highland should be looking at, protecting Shinty as well, because if we're not playing Shinty in Ireland, then where are we playing Shinty? Basically, it's Highland and Argyll. And if you look to, the Irish, they really protect and foster, the GA sports, and they've done that for years. And, I think that, in Highland, and it should be taught more in schools, and they've had that discussion as well, that it's not just on getting volunteers to come into schools to help out with Shinty. I mean, PE teachers, primary teachers who are also taking PE, it's easy for them to get a wee course from the Camanachd Association, and and it could be every year they could be introducing people to Shinty with first Shinty, with plastic sticks, etc., and then pointing them on a pathway to local clubs.
I mean, the parallel with Gaelic is you couldn't get a better example, because for a start, you're not going to find Camanachd in an English dictionary, but it is the native sport of the Highlands and Islands and Argyll and the rest. It should have that protected status. Is that something you would work towards?
Just on Russell's point, we would absolutely share that ambition of the more delivery within schools, and we're doing a lot of developmental work in terms of schools of Shinty. You now have 14, which enables curriculum-based delivery of Shinty. There's some links to ambassadors, young mentors, and there's teacher training. We have also just trained up in the last week 90 new teachers through UHI, and that's reached almost 300 in the last 3 years. But the critical bit for us now is, once they're then deployed in their schools, is how do we then support them to deliver that activity? But we would recognise that engagement in the school children is massively important in terms of their lifelong journey through the sport. So yeah, we would absolutely advocate for that, and I guess there's a role for us as an association to lobby and do that as best we can. So it's twofold. It's engaging the young children first and foremost, but it's about the connection to teachers and those people that will be out there delivering the activity as well. We need to engage them similarly and have them part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Rory said there, but I take it slightly further. I mean, the schools of Shinty, that's been great, but they're usually secondary schools. So my point is that we need to get into the primary schools, and we need to encourage the primary schools to be giving Shinty and PE lessons and, talking about Shinty, and because a lot of places it just doesn't happen. And, I would contend, I mean, it's a strength for Shinty, but it's also a weakness. If you produce a really good Shinty player at primary level, going forward, they will become a really good sportsman, because all the assets are there, hand-eye coordination, the tactical ability, the fitness, the aggression. And then we tend to lose players, to football or to rugby or whatever, that, like the skills are so interchangeable with hockey, with golf, with tennis. So everything's there. So I would actually say, use it as a positive. And they say, actually, we've got this fantastic sport, we should be teaching it in primary schools. Because, let's be honest, if we walk into a lot of sports halls and schools, the first thing you'll see is basketball hoops, and in PE you'll get badminton. Scotland is rubbish at basketball and badminton. So let's focus on something that is a pathway there for people in the Highlands to actually go on and play that sport and be involved in sport for a lifetime.
It's also a community thing, I would argue, as well. And I'm speaking very much as an outsider to Shinty, is that if anything has ever touched whether it was good or bad, a community that was attached to Shinty, you really perceive how many people care about one another in a very serious and patronizing but very involved way. I remember a number of examples, I won't cite them here, but a bad thing happened, and the people that were gathering around, sort of helping the family and fundraising and doing various things, were all through the Shinty Club, and they were motivating an awful lot of other people to get involved. That community element is really essential, not just to the sport, but to parts of the Highlands which are beginning to fray through depopulation and the like. Would you agree, disagree?
Yeah, I think you're right. And Martin touched on it. The community is critical to that. That would be where your experiences as a player, your happy memories, your engagement, your friendships will have all been blossomed and developed. And I actually think, by observations, that's a real unique selling point of Shinty, and we've touched on it as well, so that we should be proud of that and celebrate that. But they also can't just take that for granted, that community will always be there to sustain that, which is why we need to do more with the membership to support that growth and development, whether it be in primary schools and elsewhere, because we can't just rely on the goodwill of those clubs and communities to drive that. You know, we've got a collective responsibility to push that and make it a viable alternative to people when there are other options out there for young people to go into different sports and activities. We need to make Shinty be one that they want to come and do.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. It was quite funny earlier when you said, Scott, you actually asked a question to everyone here saying, do we know the number of schools that play Shinty? The answer is not enough. It just needs to be more. If we're going to sustain the sport for as long as we want to, it's just a case of just getting as many young people involved as we can. It's not going to happen overnight. It's probably a long-term project. But if we can somehow get some sort of investment through to primary schools to get as many playing as possible, it's the only way that it can be sustained.
You don't think the reason it has to be football or basketball or anything that they're studying in secondary schools or primary schools, as you also said. It could be any sport.
It kind of really was to the appetite and interest of the teachers. So again, that's why it's probably incumbent on us in association to develop and to train as many advocates for the sport within that school environment, so that they're actually championing it on our collective behalf. But yeah, that's something we would absolutely support.
Well, it's probably incumbent on Highland Council to suggest that would be what they would expect in our primary schools, and go back to the Irish example of the EGA sports, really foster and encourage Shinty.
But if we are talking about communities, I also think it's the community's responsibility to get involved and make sure that happens also.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think it's important that Shinty clubs try to place themselves at the centre of the community, as you do at Labbit, and I know from personal experience that we do at Canusi. Yesterday, we said goodbye to our chieftain, Joe Taylor, who was 92 years old, but we held his funeral at the Dell, and there's 250 people there. The whole community's there, and I'm not sure you would see that in other places, and with the sport of Shinty, and it was nice, and it was at times it was funny, at times it was emotional, and it was a really nice a nice thing for the community to do, and going back to placing the club at the centre of the community. All of us in the Highland communities, we welcome people who move to our area, maybe from the south or other places, who haven't played Shinty before. And it's important that we're welcoming and taking it in. And just a couple of weeks ago there, we held the primary six-a-sides in Canusi, and with 33 teams of that, I think there was about 270 kids there. But what was also nice from our club's point of view is that we had so many parents of our primary children who have had no experience of Shinty before. That was maybe their first time coming to the Dell on a big event like that, and they were helping out with the burgers, they were helping out in the cafe, and they were becoming part of it and understanding what's involved running it. And afterwards, they're all saying, "Well, that was fantastic," and it was really, really great. So Shinty clubs can do a lot themselves, to bring people in as well, and I think that's important to keep regenerating.
Just on that, I would completely agree. And my observations, having coming newer into the sport, is I genuinely think that is a unique part of Shinty, that we touch on the significance of community, and I don't say that kind of flippantly, but it really is the driver in these communities and towns. And I'll just say we need more Shinty in schools, and we need to do more of it. It's telling the story better of the impact and the profile and the reach that those communities have, because it extends much further than just the Shinty pitch. There are much wider kind of impacts in terms of social engagement, well-being, community engagement. It's not just about Shinty, but I think there's maybe an opportunity for us as a governing body to work with clubs to better tell the story of that impact, which is maybe not known as widely and broadly beyond the Shinty community.
One of the reasons we're here today, to be honest with you. One of the things that has occurred to a friend of mine in Dingwall, who's well enough known, Johnny McPherson, he suggested that it might be nice to bring more people to the sport is to have more matches on an evening, on a Friday evening, for example. He said there's more availability after work. People can be away on a Saturday afternoon. Is that something that would be on the table?
Absolutely, and interestingly, I mentioned earlier the club engagement sessions. That type of feedback has been coming through fairly regularly. I think, again, I've touched on as our ambition as a governing body in a sport is to modernise and to develop and to grow. And I think we need to be open to suggestions like that and others around what are the clubs telling us and what is the community telling us about how do they make it more accessible, more available, what works better for the clubs and the players. And if that means a move away from a slightly more traditional Saturday fixture list, then I would absolutely be up for exploring that. Some of the challenges we're hearing from clubs are the challenges around engaging and sustaining multiple teams, the distances travelled, etc. We recognise that as a challenge and a problem. And one way that we might alleviate some of that is fixtures at different points in the week where it's possible and be able to do that. I'd be interested to know what Russell and Martin think around that. If that's something they would support as players and club members.
As a player, yeah, I think it's flexibility within the clubs. If both clubs agree to it, I don't see any issue with fixtures being changed to either midweek or Friday night, as you mentioned earlier.
There's obvious issues sometimes with travel distances. You can't just expect someone to take an afternoon of work to go for an evening match. There's obvious practicalities underlying this, but where possible.
Well, yeah, where logistics come into play, you have to play by the rule book on that one. But with everything else, as long as both clubs are agreed, it does probably, I mean, from my experience, Friday night games draw in a crowd, and it's only better for exposure to have a bigger crowd there and get as many people involved in the sport. And as you said earlier, it probably gives each community a bit of time and opportunity to be able to attend where they otherwise wouldn't be able to because they could have other commitments on the weekend. And then that just explodes what we were saying earlier about the community aspect and getting more people from the community involved. So yeah, it's a win-win.
As purely as a spectator, an occasional spectator, I really enjoyed a Friday night game. There was an excellent game between Caberfay, for example, and Lovett. And I was on a work night out in Inverness when I heard the score, Martin, which was not an insignificant comeback by Caberfay. But it would have been fun to be there to see a match on a Friday. It's nice to have that sort of, oh, what are you doing on Friday? I'll go and see a Shinty match. It's nice to go to a football match sometimes on a Friday as well. But they don't often happen. You might also be able to tilt people away from football who are also interested in both games, because football's obviously a very Saturday game, Sunday too.
Yeah, it may not cure all the problems and challenges in the sport, but it just offers a different perspective, and actually it might touch another part of a community that aren't currently engaged in Shinty, and actually that gives them a chance to have exposure and profile, to see it and to feel it. And again, that goes back to our earlier point, that might engage more younger people into the sport who might not have otherwise had that opportunity. So yeah, but certainly keen to look at those options and to take that on board.
You've mentioned the GAA. Is there something that you'd like to see translated from that association that you'd like to see in Shinty?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt there's some learnings and innovations we could take from them. I think away from the on-field similarities and connections, some comparisons off-field can be a bit unfair because they have had significant and sustained government support and investment, which has allowed them to mobilise and do things. So maybe that's one of the learnings that we can take. The News and Association try our best to continue to advocate and levy and leverage as much investment and support into Shinty as we can. And I guess that's largely my responsibility to kind of lead and do that. But they have done significant work within their counties, and they definitely put people in places, something we've talked about today, at the heart of what they do. And I think there's some learnings we can take from that and how we tell the stories of that and the impact of that, and yet we get that to a wider audience.
Yeah, so regarding the GAA, nobody's expecting the Camanachd Association to be able to reproduce, even on a smaller scale, what the GAA are doing. And even if it was, it would be a long-term project. But is there anything apart from the funding that you are currently looking at trying to replicate that they do at all? Are you in discussion with the GAA? Are they passing down anything that you might be able to try and replicate as I said, on a smaller scale?
Yeah, so we have a really good relationship with them, which is positive. We're obviously hosting the Shinty Hurling International this year at the Butt Park in October, which is really exciting for us, and that'll have the Women's International and the Men's International. So when the GAA are over, we've actually got some meetings planned with them around some strategic conversations about how we might better link with them and understand what they've done and how we could take that forward. But I do concede it doesn't necessarily just come down to investment. I think we touched out earlier, and it's an amateur sport, but how we professionalise some of the experiences we have in terms of facilities and the offer. Maybe that's more where we can take the learning that we do drive forward the sport, we modernise it, we make it contemporary, and we amend fixtures where appropriate, and we look at that. I think that's how we as an association can help professionalise what we do in the running of the sport, which in turn will hopefully transfer into the playing side as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, it was just when you said that about professional sport and amateur sport. I know playing currently, it feels very professional, although sometimes it also feels amateur, due down to the funding more than anything else. It is very hard to try and get the money in. But then when you're training 4 nights a week, it feels like you could really turn your hand to another sport if you were asked to. But do you think that there's anything that you could do with the Camanachd Association in short term to try and make the image more professional, to see if there's any additional funding that can be brought in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few things we can look at there. My observations coming in and looking at Shinty in comparison to other amateur sports with similar size memberships as ours, I really do genuinely think Shinty punches significantly above its weight. And little things like the exposure on the BBC and BBC Alba and 7 to 8 games televised annually, whereas other sports we paying your hand off for that exposure. So there are a lot of really plus and positive things that we have. It's probably how we push that forward more and actually utilise that to our advantage to actually say, here's the impact of the sport, some of the stuff we touched on about community. There's a real strong piece, Scott, you mentioned ancestral, the cultural, the heritage. I think there's a huge package that we can better tell the story of, which in turn I would hope would be attracted to sponsors and people that might want to come in and support the sport. So yeah, absolutely, that's something that we need to do.
I agree with him. As I said, just a slightly different take on it. I think that one of the many things that the GA do very well, and it is very difficult to make a comparison because they've got so many more players and they've got so much more money. But one of the things they do very well is incorporate women's sport into the Gaelic sports as well. And, obviously, we were talking about Shinty, we'll be talking about hurling, but the camogie is just almost put on exactly the same level as the men's hurling. And I think that we're making strides in it in Shinty. I mean, I was at the ladies' finals last week. Rory was there in the Newton Moor, and I've got to say, if I go past the Market Stance or the Dell on a Wednesday night and there's 40 women and girls playing Shinty, that is absolutely fantastic, because I mean, when I was young, there was nothing, there was no pathway for girls whatsoever in Shinty, and that actually touches on all the things we've talked about already in the future of the sport, because we would hope that in the men's squad at Levitt or the men's squad at Camanachd, we've got 25, 30, 40 players playing Shinty, and hopefully they're going to go on and have families, most of them, and then these people will be involved in Shinty. The ladies' game, the women's game is exactly the same, because you've got 40 women there in Badenoch playing Shinty. When they go on and have families, they're going to be involved in Shinty as well, and that's really important for the future. So I think we're making strides there, but I think we can do slightly better at it, and it's difficult because we've got the Camanachd Association, we've got the Women's Camanachd Association, and Rory and Bert Morrison were doing a roadshow there a few weeks ago, and they kindly came to Badenoch. I think they've been to other places, and we talked about that. Sometimes in Shinty we've maybe got too many different entities, and even last week at the women's finals, the Camanachd Association social media didn't actually carry the scores at the time, and that was a bit of a shame, because people are looking into Shinty and seeing, oh, the women's finals are on today, it's on TV, and then there's nothing on the Camanachd Association social media. They don't really care about the nuances that that's a women's Camanachd Association. So I think that we could, join that together a bit more, because I think that's really important for the sport going forward.
Well, I think that's an excellent place to sort of draw this to a little bit of a close. Certainly two of the most interesting ideas I heard here today. The interesting here from people involved in the sport is that there should be much more involvement of Shinty in schools, and the possible embedding of Shinty much more into our public life through means of Highland Council and Scottish Government, offering it the status that it deserves as a irreplaceable element of Highland Scottish culture.
You've been listening to Beyond the Briefing, the stories behind the headlines, diving deeper into the biggest local stories in the Highlands. This podcast is brought to you by Highland News and Media. It's hosted by Shannon Marvell and produced by Christopher Dixon. If you enjoyed this show, make sure to subscribe and share with others who care about local journalism.